Maths questions are sometimes super straightforward, like solve this equation, but they can also be a lot more complex and tricky with layers of information and worded requirements. And it's often these worded parts of maths exams that trip students up or catch them out. It's also where there are usually some simple yet often overlooked extra steps or hints on getting more marks. So this week, as part of my 5 exam tips in 5 days series, I'm sharing the 4 most common ways students lose out on easy marks in maths exams, and of course, how to make sure your teen doesn't. And by easy marks, I mean that they've done the hard work, they know the concept or the method they need to be using, and they've applied it correctly. But where they could be getting full marks or an A grade for that method for a particular question, they may be missing out. And this is for a few simple and possible reasons. Common maths exam mistake number 1. Rounding too early. Now, if students round their answers at each stage of a multi-step calculation, there's a fair chance that their final result will be too far out from the accepted range in the mark scheme for top marks or an A grade in that final answer. So they need to get really good at using either the memory buttons or previous answer button or inserting brackets into their calculator to avoid this. Another error that's often made during their calculations is mistake number 2, not noticing different units within a question. For any calculation of any kind, all the figures or data being used must be used in the same units. Now, it's easy to miss small but important details like this in a question when under exam time pressure. But if a question has measurements of both kilometers and meters, one or other is going to need to be converted so they're all in the same units. Ideally, the units that are required in the final part of the answer. And that brings us nicely to common maths exam mistake number 3. Students not giving their final answer in the units required. Now, the question might state that they give their answer in centimeters squared, for example, but maybe they've worked it out and given it in millimeters squared, or in minutes when it should be converted into hours. This usually happens because they're so focused on getting to the answer that they then forget that final conversion. And last but not least, common mistake number 4, similar to mistake number 3 in that it's also forgotten at the final stage of the answer, not giving their answer to the correct degree of precision at the end. Now, unless otherwise stated, generally students should be giving an answer to 2 decimal places. However, it's quite common for the level of precision to be stated. For example, the question says, give your answer to the nearest tenth or the nearest thousand. Now, when students have got caught up in the process of working out and calculating, especially in those multi-step problems, it's easy to either just gloss over or completely forget about that instruction beyond the calculation itself. Now, each of these mistakes are often responsible for students dropping down, sometimes a full mark or grade for that particular question or in that exam. And remember, it only takes 1 mark to drop or climb an overall grade. Now, it might sound harsh, but this is how exam mark schemes and criteria work. So, have your teen check and double check in their next maths or numeracy test that they're keeping all figures in full throughout all their steps of the calculation, only rounding at the end. They need to be careful of units within a question and whether any conversions need to take place before the calculation maybe has even started. And then at the very end, taking note of what units the answer should be given in, and then being careful to round to the degree of precision required. I'm Katie Price, and if you'd love your teen to have lots more simple tips like these, as well as get coached in much more detailed and sophisticated strategies and exam techniques in time for their end of year exams, then be sure to check out my Exam Mastery Workshop, especially right now while I have a special early bird offer on. I'll put the link to it in the notes with this blog video. And if you have any questions about your teen or their specific exams, then feel free to drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you. It's katie.price@rocksolidstudy.com.au. And until next week, let's make this a fantastic week.